Thanks everyone for joining us for the June RTAC meeting. And this will probably be on the short side unless conversation just gets really involved and on the comment letter or some of the um, new business stuff. Okay, so Matt, we're going to start off with the introductions and we'll go around the Zoom boxes. Len, I'm from the MBTA Rider Oversight Committee and shares.
All right, Sandy.
Hey, I'm Sandy Johnston from the Central Transportation Planning staff of the Boston Region MPO. For those of you who don't know me, although I think I know almost everybody who's present, I'm the manager for the Unified Planning Work Program, which I will be talking about today. And I'm not going to say more than that because you'll hear about it extensively in just a few moments.
Thank you, Sandy. I just realized I neglected to introduce myself. I'm Matt Archer, MPO staff. Scott.
Scott Zadikis with Crosstown Connect TMA and Vice Chair of RTAC, and I work for Transaction Associates.
Thank you, Scott. Barbara?
Barbara Rutman, CTPS Administrative Assistant.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Chris?
Hi, Chris Porter, Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition.
Thank you, Chris. We've got Dan.
Hi, Dan Martin from the Brookline Transportation Department.
Great, thank you, Dan. David.
David Montgomery, Town of Needham.
Thank you, David. Franny.
Franny Osmond, Acton, Mass, Chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee, and also on the LRTA board.
Thank you, Franny. Fred.
Yeah, Fred Mosley with the American Council of Engineering Companies.
Thanks, Fred. John? Having some difficulty unmuting you, John. Might need to come back to you. Oh.
John McQueen, Walk Boston.
All right, thank you, John. Sorry about that. Laura?
Laura Weiner from the Town of Watertown.
Thank you, Laura. We've got Lisa.
Lisa Weber from the Office of Consumer Affairs and General Transit Enthusiast.
Thank you, Lisa. Marilyn?
Yes. Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, hi. Marilyn Wellens, Riverside Neighborhood Association in Cambridge.
Thank you, Marilyn. Owen?
Owen McDonald, Town of Weymouth.
Thank you, Owen. And I see that Anna Christina is here, but she is not connected to the audio, so we might need to circle back to her. But aside from that, I believe everybody has been introduced. So Len, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Matt. And so we're just going to dive right into the agenda. And that starts with Sandy Tallis talking with us about the draft UPWP.
Do you guys have any other questions or thoughts about this?
Yeah, thanks, Len. So I think most folks who are here are familiar with the basic outlines of what the UPWP is and how the process works. So I just want to talk about that briefly, and then we can dive into some questions about the studies that we have lined up for next year and the details. But just really briefly, the UPWP is the document and process through which the MPO on an annual basis lays out how it's going to spend the funding that it gets from the federal government, specifically for planning and analysis purposes. And that amounts to about $6 million in federal funding, and then there's another $1.5 million that CTPS does work on contract for MassDOT and other state agencies. So the total amount of funding programmed through this document is about $7.5 million. And where we are in the process right now, the reason I'm coming to you now is that the draft document is complete. The MPO voted to release it for public comment on May 28th. It's a 30-day public comment period. It'll be open through June 30th. So right now we're inviting public comment on the entirety of the document, but really most specifically on what we call the list of discrete studies. Discrete studies are the studies of the MPO programs kind of one at a time. And I believe you were all sent before the meeting a PDF document with the list of studies and text descriptions of a page or two for each of those. I am happy to talk about the entirety of what's in the document. Most of that is like core MPO activities that don't change much from year to year. But a small part of it is these studies, and this is because this is the changeable part that is a subject of considerable discussion with the MPO's UPWP committee each year that we really invite public comment on. I anticipate that, as usual, that will be most of where the discussion goes. If there's anything else, again, that the folks would like to talk about the process, about the document, I am happy to talk about that. But really, I'd like to, at this point, I think, just refer to that document, which, yes, thank you, Matt, for putting it up on the screen. And if you want to scroll down a page or two, Matt, so folks can just see what the descriptions look like. So you have the table at the beginning that has a list of all the titles. And then for each title of a study, we have a page or two about what tasks staff will be conducting under the aegis of that study. So take your time to look through that. You should be able to open it on your own desktops. And Len, I'll just let you run the discussion if folks want to raise their hands. And Len or Matt and I can unmute folks and people can ask questions.
That works.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Len, if I could just jump in quickly, I just want to remind folks of how to raise their hands. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be a participants button. If you click on that, a new window will open, and in the lower left-hand corner of that, there is a raise hand button. Alternately, if you have called in, you can press *9 on your phone to raise your hand. So sorry for the interruption, Len.
No, it's fine. That's fine. Totally fine. So all right, folks. Have anything you want to ask or say? Let me just scroll up to the top so I can see hands coming up. Ooh, we've got nothing. That's okay.
No, nobody has any questions, really?
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so that's quite all right. And so then this will be short and for this part. And so there's Laura
And Franny.
and Franny. Yeah. So I'll unmute.
Hi, it's Laura. I guess I was expecting you to kind of give a short paragraph about each one. I mean, not the ones that are standard, but there are some in here that I didn't think we needed to just.
Yeah, so I don't see there.
Perhaps I didn't do all my homework. Were we supposed to have read the proposals for all of these, or?
You have no obligation to read the proposal. I am happy, if it will be helpful to folks, I am happy to read through it. I just figured some people prefer reading on their own, but I'm happy to give a little spiel about each one.
Okay, just a short paragraph is really.
Yeah, sure. So I will start with.
Is there any way to make it bigger, by the way? It's hard to read on my.
Matt, can you zoom in at all?
I should be able to. No.
There you go.
Is that better?
All right, great.
All right, great.
Yeah, so improving pedestrian variables in the travel demand model. This is one that's like super wonky, but also we think really important. Basically, the idea is that the MPO's travel demand model, which is, is one of the core functions of the MPO to maintain, doesn't handle pedestrian variables and capabilities very well. That the way it kind of figures out where people are going to walk or where they're able to walk is done at a very crude level. And this is a task that's going to do some review of where the state of the practice is nationally and internationally in terms of travel demand models, and really try and make our model a lot more nuanced in terms of pedestrian travel. So hopefully that will result in a much improved capability to measure pedestrian travel within the travel demand model. Matt, you want to scroll down to the next one? All right. So there was some discussion when we talked about selecting studies with the NPO's UPWP committee about this concept of travel demand management. And the conclusion that the committee came to is that there's a lot of interest in the topic of travel demand management, but that the technical aspects are fairly well understood of what you do to create mode shift to get people to commute by modes other than by car. And that really there was interest in convening some kind of group or forum to figure out why we don't have more TVM ordinances or practices here in Massachusetts. And Laura, I know you've been working on this issue. So, we might be calling on your expertise.
Yeah. Can I say something about that, or would you rather wait till the end?
Jump in right now. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I wouldn't say, for me, the question is not why we don't have it, but what works best, what methods work. I would just add that in there somehow. Which TDM approaches are the most successful?
Thank you. Yeah. So the idea is that we're going to just put aside a small amount of money to pursue a forum together with MAPC sometime in the new fiscal year, so post-October, to talk about these issues. And if any of you, Laura or anybody else, would like to be a part of that, please do let me know.
I would like to be part of that.
All right. I'll write it down.
You just saved me an email.
Great. Fantastic. That's why I come to these meetings. All right. Matt, can you scroll down to the next study? All right. So addressing safety, mobility, and access on sub-regional priority roadways. This is what we typically call one of our corridor studies. You've probably heard people talk about it by that name. Basically, in the needs assessment and long-range transportation plan, we have a number of corridors, roadway corridors throughout the region that are identified and as being problematic in a variety of ways. And our traffic engineering staff will go out, make some recommendations about improving the functioning of the roadway with a particular emphasis on complete streets and pedestrian and bicycle improvements. And this is what we call a recurring study. It's one that happens basically every year. All right. I'm sorry. I just gave the description for the priority corridors with long-range needs assessment. The other one is corridors identified by MAPC subregions. It's essentially the same type of study. It's just whether we hear about it through the needs assessment process or from MAPC subregions. This is also a recurring study. All right. Next one. Yes. Low-cost improvements to express highway bottleneck locations. It's pretty much what it sounds like. We do this every other year, and our traffic engineers will go out to particularly problematic interchanges or bottleneck locations on the highways and see if there's anything that can be done to fix that at relatively low cost without spending hundreds of millions of dollars on new infrastructure. Trip generation rate research. Okay, this is another wonky but important one. So many and often environmental assessments for new development, real estate development, require evaluation of how many trips a new development will generate. The standard data set for generating those estimates is from the Institute of Transportation Engineers, or ITE, and that data set is notoriously imperfect. It's based on national averages. It's sometimes generated from a small sample size, and the places that it was generated from are highly biased towards suburban locations. So there's a certain subjective art to interpreting the ITE rates, and what we're going to try and do with this study is kind of ground truth it using local data from local environmental assessments and possibly even some observed data to see what the rates actually look like in a Boston region context, as opposed to national estimates and averages.
I like that one too.
Great. Intersection improvement program, again, pretty much what it sounds like. Our traffic engineers will go out and pick a few intersections to look at, identify some conceptual low-cost improvements, and then talk to the relevant municipalities about how to implement them. It should be able to hit 10 or 15 intersections. That's the hope. And ideally, these wouldn't be massive rebuilds or anything. It would be, tweaking signal timing or putting in a new sign or some such. Nothing too spectacular. Access to commercial business districts phase 2. So a lot of you probably remember that a couple of years ago, we put together a survey to try and figure out how people arrive at, by what mode people arrive at shopping districts and how they behave once they're there, among other things. And we had some issues with kind of bandwidth of getting that study out and the questions in the study. So the idea now is to really improve the survey and get it out as a toolkit that municipalities and other partners can use to collect this data themselves, because we as the MPO staff don't have the bandwidth or the resources to be collecting this data on a yearly basis or on any kind of recurring basis ourselves. But the idea is to push it out there in a way that's user-friendly, that folks can help us partner with us to generate this data, because we really think it's very interesting. Future of the curb, again, another one that this is a topic we've worked on before. Going to kind of carry forward this, looking at what the future of curb space usage is going to be, and making some recommendations about active management of curb space, dedicated transit lanes, bike lanes, all that kind of stuff. This is closely interlocked with the access to commercial business districts study, because the data really helps shape the recommendations. Multimodal resilience and emergency planning. You've probably heard a bunch from other people about this, but the MPO has really been starting to get into resilience as a topic over the last couple of years. This is a big thing in the world now, and what we're doing with this $30,000 is to update the all hazards planning tool that's already on the CTPS website, which is old, and the user interface is not particularly helpful. So we're going to refresh the data that is in that tool and build a new user interface that is more friendly. And then ideally that will be the jumping off point for more studies in future years that will allow us to identify things about emergency preparedness and risks to add transportation assets and infrastructure, looking at like what areas might be cut off in a flood scenario, that kind of thing. All right, staff-generated research. This is one that we do every year. It's a small budget line for staff to come up with research ideas or small technical assistance projects that they want to pursue, and go out and do them. Mapping major infrastructure projects. So probably it's possible that some of you have seen, if you visited Scott Peterson's office, he's got a print map in there that is very large, and it's basically a map of all of the major transportation infrastructure projects in Eastern Massachusetts from around 1800 to the year 2000, which is when it was made. And the idea of this project is to take that map and update it with projects from the last 20 years and anything that may have been missed previously, and also build an online version. They can be interactive and will have layers, and we think it'll be really interesting in terms of any retrospective studies we want to do, but also just a really cool tool to make available to the public. All right, and then informing the big ideas behind the MPO scenario planning process. This is something that we're really excited about, because development for the new long-range transportation plan is going to be kicking off sooner than you think. You might think, well, we just approved one last year, but it's a 4-year cycle, and we need to do a lot of planning leading up to the adoption of the next long-range plan. And part of that is we're going to try and reinvigorate the MPO scenario planning process. Scenario planning is a tool or a process by which you look at different possible futures and different possible combinations of infrastructure investments or policies to see how they might influence future events and future ways of being for the transportation system. And the idea behind this study is really to just give staff a budget line to go out and talk to groups like the Advisory Council or like municipal stakeholders to hear about what are the big ideas that we should test in this scenario planning process. Big ideas are things like congestion pricing or changing zoning or reallocating road space to different modes, really like big high-level concepts that then we can translate into things that can be tested through the travel demand model or other data tools that we have available to us. So that's the list of studies for this year. I am happy to take any questions.
I'll ask a question. So is this an already vetted list? I mean, is this is the final list?
So where we are now is the MPO has voted the draft, has approved this list together with the draft document.
Okay.
Theoretically, the draft document can still be changed, but it's, you know, it is in a kind of draft form that's relatively final at this point. One thing I will say about this is that these are not the final scopes for these studies. They're kind of just sketch descriptions, and we have a practice of always presenting a scope of work to the MPO for each project before it kicks off. So those will be, each of these will get a scope that's presented to the MPO in the fall, and any input that we get on these now can be incorporated into those scopes. If there's something that you think is really important to throw into one of these that you'd really like to see included, we're happy to take that input and take it into consideration in the scoping process.
Thank you.
I see Andy, I see several people have their hands up. Len, do you want to call on people or do you want me to?
I'm sorry, I was talking and I was muted, sorry. So I just unmuted Andy.
Great, thank you all. I jumped in just after I think Sandy started. As a former CDAPS staffer, I enjoy looking at the UPWP projects. So I'm happy to have a chance to actually take a look and see what's coming up in the next year. You know, I think one thing, there's a lot on my mind. Society has been pretty heavy this past few weeks. Just, you know, I think reflecting on what's kind of been going on in society. My department actually just had a listening session to just talk about the death of George Floyd and all these kind of things. We're also talking about how we could look at our work when it comes to the question of equity. And so I'm wondering, you know, with some of the UPWP projects, I don't expect that a new project idea would come up. I think given the fact that, you know, these kind of ideas were already in flight before, but I'm wondering if there would be opportunities to advocate for taking a look at these already existing ideas in a way that could further the conversation about equity. So in terms of which communities have access to these programs and whether some of these kind of studies are able to receive input, not necessarily directly from just municipalities, of course, but, you know, directly from folks in the community who may have safety concerns or access concerns about, for example, like the sub-regional priority roadways or the corridors in the long-range transportation plan. And, you know, if they aren't included already yet, whether this could be a consideration for how these studies are actually implemented in the next fiscal year. So that's kind of one question. I'll just leave it there for now.
Can I jump in on this and say that, I mean, I know that Kate White in the process, has done a lot of outreach to everyone. I mean, it's come up with lots of innovative ways to ask for that input. So I think what may happen now is that since people are more focused on equity, normally the people who aren't focusing on a lot of things beforehand, they may turn their eyes towards this and then see, that we are open towards accepting their input. And the only other thing I will say is that when it comes to the revision of the metrics for the TIP, we can push to have the equity points raised, so that they are closer to the points allotted to other categories such as safety and capacity management. So I'll stop and let Sandy answer.
Yeah, no, thanks,
What would be
Len.
on
And Andy, I think that's a great question. We talked about this a little bit with the 3C Documents Committee this morning as well. And I think probably you and I can talk offline a little bit about some of the more technical aspects, but the gist of it is that this is actually something that we've been talking about at CTPS for the last 6 months or so, kind of even before things became as big in public consciousness as they are now. And the approach that we had hit on is to try and, as we do already, integrate equity into all of the tasks, integrate an equity lens into all of the work we do at a certain point. And for the UPWP's funded studies, the point we picked to try and work that in is during the scoping process. So as it stands right now, once this document is approved, it becomes kind of a black box, and nobody sees the scope again until it comes to the MPO to be voted on in October or November or whenever. And there are some questions about the feasibility of opening up that process a little bit, but it's something that we'd like to work on because we think, especially from an equity perspective, getting input during the scoping process instead of just, oh, you can show up at the NPO meeting where it's already been written, would be a really important step for figuring out how to best apply it to all of these ideas. So I think, that's something worth thinking about. I think we're thinking about it, especially it's been accelerated recently, but I'm happy to talk about more details offline.
You have any more you want to add, Andy?
They're, as differential expression experiments go,
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I guess the other aspect is, so the trip generation rate research and the TDM strategies conversation is something that I know that the city of Cambridge is definitely interested in. We've had a lot of internal conversations, so any kind of convenings that the MPO or CTPS do together with MAPC, I can say for the city of Cambridge, we'd love to talk about it, especially about trip generation. We've had a lot of conversations that I've been involved personally in, and I think we see, especially in the inner core cities, how ITE trip generation rates are so incompatible with what actually happens on the ground, and also are incompatible with our long-term planning around climate change, the transportation system in our cities, and so many things. So definitely just want to vouch for how excited that I am to see this at a regional level, given that I think so many things are done in a unsensitive way to the context of the places where all these studies are being done. So just vouching my support here.
Well, it's always good when I try to be polite, but then somebody is more blunt.
All right, great. You didn't hear me laughing loudly. So we'll next go to
was
John.
because it had been seen that
There you go, John.
This is a similar question to a degree as trip generation, and just wondering what your universe of contexts will be, if it will be, let's say, the three top ones, the inner urban, the inner core, and then the suburban, as well as will it be commercial and residential developments, those segments, because I've run into the same questions in some of the initiatives I've been with, like in Alston, Harvard campus expansion, et cetera, and some of those. So just a question, we'll be covering those bases.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Great question. I don't know for sure. I imagine that our modeling people are thinking about that to some extent. I know the intention is to look at a variety of built environments and a variety of different types of development. But that is the kind of question, for example, that gets answered a lot during the scoping process. So certainly I am happy to be in touch after during this period or after the UPWP is approved, or to put you in touch with the people who are going to be managing the study to make sure that they can hear all of the different needs out there. But I can't give any concrete answers right now about exactly what it's going to look like. And to be perfectly honest, if I did have answers, I'm not sure I would be able to understand them because I don't speak modeler fluently. But I will, if this sounds like it's a real topic of interest, and it sounds like something we might want to bring back to the advisory council at some point, is what I'm hearing. So I think that sounds like it could be a really productive and fun thing to do.
Also, another 2 segments that just came in, combinations. One are the institutional uses. For instance, like the science and engineering building has its own trip generation estimates in Alston and Western Avenue, and mixed use where it's lab space and residential and a little bit of commercial. For instance, the new Nexus building that's under it's still under review by Boston redevelopment. So those are 2 hybrids.
If you can send me an email and pass those exact buildings along, I'm sure that we'd be thrilled to have someplace to start.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to unmute Anna Christina.
The upper left-hand corner.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I just had some quick questions. I'm not sure if you can answer them for me, but regarding the multimodal resiliency and emergency planning, I'm wondering how closely you're working with Boston, since they already put out a climate resiliency plan, and they're discussing now as far as emergency planning, like during, like the storm we had 2 years ago with the high tides, like how they're going to use barriers, portable barriers, and yet leave some emergency right away to facilities for people to access. That's number 1. And number 2, I think 30,000 is too low because I don't know if Andy has been dealing with this at all, but technically Boston geologically, it's an island except at low tide. And when it gets really high tide during these storm surges and whatnot, I mean, what are we cutting off? I don't know if 30,000 is going to cover all the possible emergency planning for a study that you get done in a year.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. Some of our staff have been really working on catching up with all the resiliency work that's going on in the city of Boston and around the region over the past year. We have a 2020 UPWP study kind of devoted to that. So both our traffic engineering staff and Ariel Patterson from my group, from the certification activities group, have been working on that. And I think the idea is going to is to try and integrate knowledge of everything that's going on around the region in terms of planning into our work. As for the tool itself and the question of budget, so really the $30,000 is just to build the tool. We're not doing any original research. It's just building out the tool using publicly available data sets. The current version of the tool does include some secure data sets through the Department of Homeland Security, which is my understanding were a major pain to obtain access to last time around when it was originally built, and we're not going to do that this time. It's just building the tool and adding data sets that other folks have created that we can get access to easily, and to build the capability to use the tool for transportation-specific analyses later. So that is why we think that $30,000 is a sufficient budget just for doing that work. We had, in fact, discussed having this be a larger study earlier on in the process and concluded that A, we weren't ready for it, and B, it would require such a large budget that that it wasn't going to be feasible for us.
Okay, I mean, that's it for now.
Thank you.
Sorry. So I'll move on to Franny at this point.
There's a lot.
There you go, Franny.
In the upper left, lower right hand quadrants.
Oops, I thought I unmuted you. So I've asked to unmute you. There you go.
There. I think I reversed you immediately.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah, I had two questions. Well, three very small ones. Are all of these, when they're done, I'll just name all my three questions and then you can answer.
Go for it.
What's the method by which they are reported back? Is it a specific like series? Is there some regular way, written and in person, that they are presented? Or are they, this one is shown at RTAC and at this conference and this one happens here? I'm just wondering what the plan is each year for these to be reported, the results. And how much are individual comments, how are they important? Like, what's done with the comments that come in during the public comment period? Because I'm wondering if RTAC is
those two questions
as a whole. And then the other is to get to this list. I remember us giving ideas, and now here's a list. How much was removed? Like, how much did you have to take out of all this universe of ideas?
Yeah, great question. So first, to address the question of how these are reported back, every UPWP funded study is eventually reported to the NPO. Many of them get a presentation at the NPO. Many of them also get a presentation at the advisory council. Most of these will have some kind of written deliverable, some kind of report, and then will be presented to the NPO, posted on the website, etc. I think things like the multimodal resilience, which is really just building on a digital tool, we'll probably present the tool to the NPO when it's done, but there probably won't be any written document that accompanies that.
Yeah.
But yeah, by and large, these studies always get a report at the NPO, complete with some kind of written deliverable. Okay. The second question was about how individual comments are taken into accordance. Yeah. So the truth is, we don't usually get very many comments on the UPWP during the public comment period, never more than 3 or 4. And for the most part, they focus on the process, or we endorse these studies or whatever. But anything that addresses a specific idea or study or task, something that's in the document, I will then pass on to CTPS management and to the program, to the staff who will be managing that program or study. And often, if there's something, it'll come back to the UPWP committee as well. And then I totally blank on your third question. I'm sorry.
It was how much was taken out? Like, we gave a bunch of ideas. Just in a nutshell, what was the process after that? Like, where else did you get all the ideas, right, and how much did you have to take out?
Yeah, so in the UPWP universe this year, there were 16 studies, and I think 13 of them are funded in some kind or another. It is an iterative process, as you know. We kind of generate a whole bunch of ideas during the fall, yeah, and then put that all together in a spreadsheet and sit down as staff and go through it and say, okay, well, these two are redundant with each other, or this one is redundant with something that MassDOT is doing, or this is outside the scope of what we can fund through the UPWP. And then out of that comes what we call the universe of projects, which is just a list of blurbs of potential studies. And there's usually in that anywhere between 15 and 25 ideas. And so this year we funded almost all of them in one form or another, some of them in a very small form, like the TDM strategies. But yeah, there were, we talked about this in the 3C documents committee earlier also, and Chris showed the list of studies as the advisory council had passed on to me in a letter. But there was one about more cost-effective analyzing cost-effectiveness of bicycle and pedestrian improvements, which was just a pretty vague concept, very promising, but at this point very vague. And that was just something the UPWP committee decided. Basically, when I surveyed them, none of them liked the idea very much. So that didn't go very far. And there was a couple of other things that were basically redundant with work that's being done by other agencies. I know that we had talked about a first and last mile plan, And that is something that people thought was promising, but MassDOT is right now doing a station access study. And we don't have a full scope for that, at least as of the last time I checked. So we didn't want to risk doing work that was redundant for them. We'll bring that back next year if their study has things that we would like to still address that it doesn't address.
Okay, thanks.
And just to add to that, I mean, so we get to suggest things that we want in the universe, and then Sandy will do a presentation to us before we then rank them. So we passed in our ranking, so that was our chance to say which studies we would like from the universe to be selected for the draft. And one thing we can do in our comments, though, is to the extent we see a gap or something that we want differently, we can start the process of advocating for what we want in the following year. And that's what happened earlier years with respect to getting the pre-post study done. We pushed for that, and we started pushing for that the year before, maybe a few years before it was put into the universe, and then we advocated really hard for that, and that was in the universe last cycle, and now it's a study. And just so you know about what happens with these studies, Andy, when we had a little extra session a couple of weeks ago, he presented 2 studies to us, and those were studies that were in the previous cycle, the access to CBDs and the future of the curb, which we're seeing phase 2s of in this cycle. So that's a little more answer to your question, Franny. I see Franny's hand is still up. I don't know if she wants to talk again, so I'm going to ask her to mute if she wants to say something.
No.
Okay, all right, fine. Okay, cool. So with that and no other hands up, we will then shift to Chris to give a summary of what happened in the 3C committee as we prepared to write a letter about this draft UPWP.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, actually, we talked about a number of the same issues that we just talked about right here. So just kind of going back a little bit, I think back in March, the 3C committee had actually provided comments on the kind of universe of studies that were being considered for the UPWP. And so it was very helpful that the MPO was kind of took those comments into consideration. We had completed a survey is based on rankings, and I'm just going to show that survey here. The rankings are from top to bottom, with 1 being at the top. So most of the projects were funded, and I just think we had a couple that were ranked high that didn't get funded. There's a transit-oriented development resident survey, which I think was not funded for some good reasons, including the kind of the not really feasible to do in-person surveys these days. And the regional state routes to transit, which is sort of covered by some other MBT or MassDOT activities right now, or maybe some overlap. And then finally, the cost benefit analysis for bike measures that Sandy mentioned wasn't going to work for other reasons. So in general, I think we think it's a good list of studies. People did ask about the impacts of COVID-19 on any of these studies, and it was confirmed that there wouldn't be anything involving traffic counts. It wouldn't really be done until at least. Well, the studies wouldn't start until October anyway, so hopefully.
Chris, I just want to interrupt to say there's something that's going on with your audio that was really, causing problems for like the last 30 seconds of what you said. So if you were doing something differently, maybe not do that, but certainly at this point, back up maybe 30 seconds and say what you said, because it was really garbled.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing I was doing differently was sharing my screen. So anyhow. Yeah, so let me see. So yeah, so I think so the 3C committee had completed the survey. Most of the projects were funded. I think a couple of the projects were not funded for good reasons that Sandy mentioned. And then, so the additional comments that we had and that we discussed at the 3C committee meeting earlier today, the first was about the effects of COVID-19 on studies. And it was confirmed that, well, first of all, the studies won't start until at least October, just because of the funding. Certainly no traffic counts until any study involving traffic counts, we'll have to wait and see how things get back to normal. There are just a couple of studies that might involve that, so there might need to be some flexibility in terms of when those are done. Or if worse comes to worse, replacing it with something else. But that's something that I think was going to be revisited later. Another comment was, is there any studying of the effects of COVID-19 on traffic in various forms? And for example, collecting bicycle and pedestrian data counts. I don't think it's not going to be something that's going to be worked into this year's UPWP cycle, but there are other efforts. That seems like a worthwhile thing to look at. There's sort of a lot of data collection that's already been happening on traffic and transit and that sort of thing. Third comment, we had a discussion of the equity issue, so I think, we'll probably want to incorporate that in our comments. Let me see, what else we have. I think, there was also a question on this follow-up on the post-evaluation of past studies, and Sandy said that, with the UPWP tracking database they are doing that as much as possible. Maybe about half of the municipalities have been cooperative, so we have some data, but not as much as we would like. And then there was the discussion of possibly, the MPO was discussing possibly allowing public input into the scope development. As the scopes of the UPWP studies are developed over the summer, I think the committee felt that it would be nice to have that opportunity, probably just doing it once in a way that doesn't hold up the process too much and isn't too much of a burden on staff. That was, I think, one of the concerns, is potentially be a burden on staff to, manage another public involvement process. So, we didn't want to kind of hold that up too much. Anyhow, let me see if I can. I probably got too many things going on here. I hope the audio is still okay.
Well, as soon as you started talking again, it kind of deteriorated, at least for me. And if other people were having a problem, can you just raise your hand? Because it was just me, that's fine. It was only at the very end that I kind of lost most of what you said, but at that point, I think we knew what you were going to say. So Owen is indicating that he was having problems with the audio too. So maybe it's just the two of us. Everyone else heard all they need to do. So that was good. That would be good. I mean, if it was just a few of us. Well, Laura is too. So
I was having issues too, Lon.
All right,
as was I, and I'm getting a couple of messages through the chat saying that indicator audio issues.
All right. Well, let me. You know what? I'll just turn my video off here. Maybe that'll help.
That does seem to be much better, Chris.
Okay. All right, so on my screen here, then I have sort of the outlines of a letter. We didn't feel like we had too much to say. Okay, no, we're back to viewing Matt's screen. Okay. Anyhow, so we basically had 3 points in the letter. One is just appreciating the opportunities we were given for public input, or for input into the UPWP project list as it was being developed. The second point basically says that we're glad that the MPO was already working to integrate equity considerations into projects, and just want to kind of encourage that, to continue doing that with a strong focus on equity, especially in light of recent events highlighting disparities in transportation access and safety. And the third, I guess, affirming that it would be nice to be able to have the opportunity to provide comment on draft scopes for UPWP studies, if that could be done in a manner that doesn't hold up the process too much. So I don't know if there's any other issues that people feel like we should comment on.
So I think Laura has her hand up. Just ask to unmute her. I'll ask to unmute again. Laura, do you want to say something?
It was up to tell you that I was having trouble hearing
Okay.
also.
Okay,
Lower.
fine.
All
No
right.
problem. No problem. So, anyone else? Anything?
Yeah, I think this happens sometimes depending on people's.
Well, I think we're good to go on the outline of the letter. And well, actually, Anna Christina just raised her hand. I just asked to unmute you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to harp on it and be off topic, but just I didn't understand or hear from Andy at all how much Cambridge is getting involved in any emergency as far as the resiliency and emergency planning, like what they're doing as far as barriers. Are they doing anything? I don't know if you can answer that, Andy. And it's slightly off topic, but I'd love to know. That's it.
It's okay. We got time made. So if Andy wants to say something, I'm gonna unmute him. And
so in terms of the transportation system, our mobility system, we do have a vulnerability assessment and some climate action plans that really inform quite a bit of our work. I think we've managed more or less to keep up with the city of Boston on the resiliency work. I do know that our resiliency plans are much more holistic than some of the transportation climate action plans that I've seen. So we've actually advocated, for example, just as one example, to the MBTA to do a Redline vulnerability assessment. And we actually saw that in, I think, a previous, or maybe it's this CIP process for the MBTA that that type of work is being funded. And we know, at least in Cambridge, that holistically we have a transportation issue at Alewife in particular, where the red line is vulnerable. Actually in Alewife first, rather than the Charles River Basin. And so we know a little bit, but that's kind of all that we have. Clearly the MBTA has all the data about where water could infiltrate into the system and the tunnels and all that kind of stuff. So we've advocated beyond that. So I think my understanding too is that CTPS has reached out to our climate and environmental planners, both in the Department of Public Works and also on the other side in my department, in the planning department. So I think we have at least our coordination or communication with CTPS decently covered.
Okay, yeah, that's just it. My big concern is some nightmare scenario where you're getting all kinds of inflatable barriers going up around Boston, and yet you have people like flooding out in a hurry to you know, basically save themselves at high tide. Where are they going to go? They're going to go through Cambridge first. But I mean, I guess no one can predict that till it's occurring. So just wondering.
all right, thanks. Thanks for bringing it up. And so I'm gonna unmute Mr. Montgomery.
Thank you, Len. And thanks for this work on this letter. I just had one small comment. It's sort of mirroring one I made sometime in the last couple of years, which is I would prefer to see the first sentence rephrased a little bit, which is to say that rather than being charged by the MPO, I'd like it to be reframed, if possible, to be charged to provide the MPO with this advice. Basically, maybe some people see it as a minor distinction, but we were charged by our charter documents, which is the same documents that created us and created the MPO. And it's not that the MPO in and of itself gave us this direction. Everybody who put this whole thing together put us in this advisory role. And so I'd like to suggest a slight reworking of that sentence if possible.
And I agree wholeheartedly. So thanks for bringing that up, David. So yeah. I would just repeat what you said. So great. Anything else you want to add, David?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is I think this is
I'm sorry, Len. We actually should take a vote just to give Chris the power to finalize this letter, and that. Well, I mean, I guess this is fairly final, but I would say to give Chris the power to finalize the letter and submit it to Sandy as the advisory council's comment.
Thank you for that. You're right. So I appreciate that, and
No
so
worries.
that's what we'll do. So I will entertain a motion. We'll do the second, then we'll open up for comments, and then we'll close comments and then do the vote. So does someone want a motion that we authorize Chris to finalize the letter, and he can then pass it on to Sandy on behalf of RTAC? I am going to unmute Laura. Ask to unmute her.
Unmute. So moved.
And then I will, thank you. Ask to unmute Andy.
And a second.
Great. And so I guess we can make this easy on everyone and just say, if you're in favor of this, raise your hand. Is that okay with you, Matt? Or
I think I would actually maybe prefer it if anybody is opposed to this to raise their hand.
Sure. It was just merely a matter whether we could do it by hand signal or whether we had to do it by voice. So we'll do it by hand signal, however you prefer to do it. Okay, Matt? So you'll make the call.
All right. Yeah. So if anybody is opposed to what was just proposed, please raise your hand and I will let you speak, or Len will rather.
Well, since it's a vote at this point, yeah.
So I do see Anna Christina has a hand up.
I'm not really opposing. I just wanted to make sure that David's point got put in there somewhere. I don't see it.
I just changed it. If you're not, you should be seeing that text up here at the first paragraph. I just changed it.
Oh, provided was. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah. Right.
I do not oppose it.
Yeah, no problem. And actually, I was jumping ahead of myself. What I even said I was going to do, which was to do some comments on this. So we just consider this a comment at this point. So any other comments before we do the actual vote?
There's a bit of a subtlety. So if you go into my...
Okay, so no comments. So now we'll do the vote. So as Matt has suggested, if you or not, if you oppose the motion to give Chris the ability to finish the letter and then send it on to Andy, to Sandy on our behalf, raise your hand.
Down in 3, but
and I'll do a little countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's a yes. Okay, Chris. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you, everybody. Chris, I would just say, just submit it by email. Don't send a hard copy letter this time. I don't know how the hard copy would make its way to me, given that nobody's in the office.
I wasn't planning on it, but thank you for confirming.
Sounds good.
Great. And I guess, I have a question, and that is, do you prefer docs or PDFs, or does it not matter?
Both.
Like Word docs? Both are possible? Okay. So Word docs, a Word doc and a PDF. Okay, great. And because I'll probably chime in either with myself or the writer oversight committee. And because I'm the biggest fan of UPWP. All right. So chair's report. Well, other than these, being the UPWP and working on the approving the final tip, the big discussion that I found interesting was maybe a month ago. Yeah, I think it was right after our meeting where the MPO discussed the change in definition of a major infrastructure project. because as you may recall, we had a situation where some projects that weren't major infrastructure projects went above the cost threshold, and so it pushed them into the major infrastructure category, which then changed the weighting or the distribution of projects in in the tip. So it made it took what may have been like just above 30% major infrastructure projects and pushed it into maybe the high 30s, low 40s, or even closer to 50, if I'm getting my numbers right. But the whole point is that the projects weren't initially designated as major infrastructure, but just the cost increases through them, into that category. So if I recall correctly, we are going to explore increasing that cost threshold, and there may even be some consideration of maintaining the designation of a project, even if it crosses that threshold. But I'm not sure about that, but certainly there's going to be a continuing discussion about increasing the threshold for what determines the major infrastructure project. So that was a big one for me from all of the recent MPO meetings. So if you want to add something to that, Matt, or saying to anyone else who may have been listening in to those meetings, feel free to, and let me bring in the participants.
No, I think you covered it fairly well. So the current threshold for becoming a major infrastructure project is $20 million. And as Len indicated, there are some projects that are, say, complete streets projects that are now classified as major infrastructure because they ran over $20 million due to cost increases. And yeah, the MPO has goal percentage fund, like a percentage of funding for each funding category. And as Len said, this skews the numbers. So that discussion is ongoing.
I'm not sure when they're going to report back to us, but it won't be long. We hopped on this pretty quickly after that became apparent as an issue. As we were doing the summary of the TIP projects in preparation for the draft TIP, and so that's the sheriff's report. And so, do we have minutes?
I had planned on it, and this is my own fault. I realized that I needed something from my notes on that meeting to complete the minutes, which are, of course, at the office. So we are currently letting one person into the office at a time. I have not been there in 3 months, but I am talking with our admin team to get in there next week. So for the next meeting, they will be ready.
That's okay, because I would have missed them, and I'm trying not to miss things, so great. I'm glad I didn't miss them. Sorry, the minutes aren't available, but at this point, I'm just happy that I didn't miss them. Old business, new business, member announcements, and I will let others go first before I pounce on this. So anyone has anything they want to add along those lines of category 6? Agenda item 6? There's Franny. I'm going to unmute her. Yes, Franny.
I think Yes. Hi. I wanted to just tell people about a grant that our Crosstown Connect TMA is applying for. I may have mentioned this at the last meeting. And if I could share my screen and just show you it. And I also put the link to it. There was money available before COVID to help taxi companies and livery companies who were struggling because of TNCs get better at technology and sort of catch up. So there was money to help them. And now that COVID is here, this MAPC is putting out that money as a grant program to let the taxis do some of the COVID related needs. And so actually, is it possible for me to share my screen?
Sure, here, I'm going to make you a co-host, and then that will give you the ability to do so.
Okay.
And you should see a screen share button, a big green button.
Okay. So this is what it looks like. And we're applying with about 3 or 4 towns together. And the idea is that some needs haven't been able to be met by our local services, and we can get taxis to do that. And it includes workforce transportation, that somebody might not have their usual transportation to essential jobs available. And the other is like delivering food or delivering medicine, or food pantry things. So I just wanted to remind people that this existed. They have some other COVID related grants, I think, but I've just been focusing on this one. So I just wanted to make people aware if they weren't. And that's all.
Great, thank you, Franny.
Sharing my screen.
Okay, so I Andy has his hand up. Yeah, let me unmute. Ask to unmute Andy.
So
oops,
for
I lost when the screen got refreshed from the not sharing. I lost my interface to Andy. There we go. All right, and did Andy put his hand down?
No, I'm here. I think I should still be heard, right?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. Yeah.
Okay. So no, I just wanted to share, the city of Cambridge is a member of the NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. I don't know if you all knew this, but we were earlier this year, before COVID-19 really shook things up, planning to host the conference together with the cities of Boston and Somerville. So if you all have not been plugged into the NACTO, the association, it's a pretty progressive association that's really trying to figure out how to make these things like complete streets work on the city streets from a city perspective. That conference has actually been postponed for the Boston region to 2022. Just given that NACTO already had a conference venue and city already selected for 2021 when COVID broke out. That being said, there is a virtual conference that NACTO is trying to organize. I understand that this current moment that we're in regarding transportation is really unprecedented. And it is, for I think many folks, traumatizing in terms of we just don't know what to expect for the future. And so I do suspect that NACTO is going to be working on content for that. But since we are a member city, I just wanted to make the plug that people do check out NACTO. They have had COVID-19 transportation resources as one way that they've reacted to the COVID-19 response. And they've actually been hosting peer group activities, especially in relationship to the societal uprisings and unrest that we've seen, and of course, the issues surrounding George Floyd, and just kind of systemic racism in this country. They've been really good at just convening opportunities for people to hear from each other and also talk about what that means for our work. So I really appreciate them, and I just wanted to give a plug just in this group to that organization.
Thanks, Andy. And I see Franny has her physical hand raised. She's waving her hand. I'm going to unmute her. Don't count on it always working, Franny, because a lot of times I don't have the people's video up. It
was funny. I could not find the place under participants where I.
Okay, well maybe Matt will see.
But I'm here. But yeah, my comment. I wanted to appreciate Mark being for twice mentioning what's going on and the racial justice issue. And I've always felt better. So I'm a minority in being female in this group. And I've always noticed what it was like and how it sort of gave me energy and made me feel more at home when there was a little period of time where we had a lot of female leadership around. And so it makes me, and from everything I'm listening to, I want to appreciate what it's like to be Black in our world and our transportation world. And thank you, Mark, for sort of just mentioning it, because it is an issue all around us and in our RTAC as well.
All right, Franny, thank you very much. So this is gonna run a little long, but not much longer. So I would like for folks to maybe send me email, Matt and myself, email about how you feel about these that extra session that we had a couple of weeks ago. I mean, if folks are amenable to that, I mean, we may do more of those where we just kind of focus on one topic. I mean, it might very well be, I mean, like a report on a UPWP study or something. I think I think it will. We could either have longer meetings. I don't think there's an appetite for that, or maybe these additional meetings. But there's just a lot to cover sometimes. And so, Matt, was that last meeting recorded?
It was, yes.
Okay, so yeah, so if people can't participate, then it would be recorded and you can review it later on. But and so I guess rather than saying well, yeah, say either way, but certainly the comments that they prefer that not be done will be weighed much more heavily than those that say they're fine with it because we don't want to do something that people don't want to do, especially if they give us a good reason for not doing it. Okay, the second thing, I need to switch screens myself for my notes, is think about whether or not you want to do an August meeting. In the past, we've done field trips in August. We haven't done a meeting, but we've done a field trip. And we could try and do a virtual field trip, or we could just do a meeting. I think there are things to cover, especially since we skipped at least one meeting, maybe two. I think we skipped one meeting due to COVID. And so there's certainly ground to catch up on. I'm thinking in July, maybe having one of the new members of the CTS staff come to talk to us about scenario planning. He did a presentation at the previous MPO meeting, and I thought it was a good presentation. I didn't ask a lot of questions because I wanted to get him to an RTAC meeting, and so either we could have him at the July meeting, or if there's a lot on the agenda, maybe that would be a situation where we could have extra meeting. And also thinking in August or September, bringing in the person who did a presentation on the pedestrian report card, which I found was very interesting too. And I think pedestrian stuff may become a bigger issue because we may see people walking a lot more until we get a vaccine. And the final thing is an announcement about something that has happened to me that is positive, and that is I narrowly won an election to be on the select board in Arlington. And I tell you, I have such an appreciation for the phrase, every vote matters. I mean, it was 88 votes. I mean, we had, the turnout was huge. I mean, it was more than 50% of the previous year, more than double the year before that. I mean, the number of votes that I got was nearly the combined vote of the two winners, in the 2018 election. And so, and I didn't make any promises. I just was more an approach, but my approach was the regional approach. And one of the things that I felt made me qualified and gave me a difference between other categories was the candidates was my passion for coming up with regional solutions. And I think the RTAC is critical to that, along with the MPO. And so so that's that. I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I'm certainly not paid enough to go anywhere by that position. So I plan on continuing to work here, and it all kind of meshes together very well. So that's that. And so unless someone else has something that they want to add, I see Anna Christina's hand is up. I just asked to unmute her.
On 0. However,
yeah, there you go.
I just said congratulations. I sent you a little congrats in the private, man.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. I see that someone likes the idea of extra presentations or even in-person tour. Gotcha. Outside. Gotcha. Okay. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
For genes that were just zeros in other samples. So you might have, there's a subset of genes that.
I can't do it. Yeah. So there's Owen. Oh, one other thing I want to say. Yeah. Another thing we can do is I'd like to have members talk about what about themselves and their organizations at some point. And so we may spend a large chunk of a meeting, maybe that August meeting, if we decide to have one, and get an introduction from members and talking about what they do and what they would like to
Does that make sense?
the RTAC to cover or deal with. So asking to unmute Owen. Yes.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. And a second, hopefully coming from Andy.
And second.
Okay. Without any opposition, which would be shown by a raising of the hand, we're going to adjourn. And I know that Anna Christina's hand is just up because I know she wants to go. And so that's it, folks. Thank you very much.
Right.
Take care.
Right.
Everybody.
Stay safe.
Have a good one, folks.
Stay safe.
You wouldn't